the last session before lunch, and we are well over lunch time by any standards. So thanks for staying back. Thanks for being around to listen to two awesome panelists that I have on both sides. With such panelists, I almost feel like an umpire, standing right behind the stumps watching Sachin Tendulkar and Virendra Sehwag. I don't know, Dr. Palan, if you get that or not, to batting. So that's probably the best one.
No, I get it. It's just that I'm not as good looking as either of them.
No, you're great looking, Dr. Palan. I've seen you for 20 years now. You look pretty much the same. Well, and I'm not trying to date you here.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So we're talking about human potential and how it enhances performance. When Sherm called me and Mr. Bhatt, I should confess, I was so happy. The session was not about AI and machine learning and how these two get applied to people and human potential. Lately, at least in the last 12, 18 months, the flavor of the season in most conferences is where do we search for the H in HR and what's happening with AI and and machine learning. And while a lot is happening, I still believe people potential is kind of the most important thing. You go back to history. You go back to days when Mahatma Gandhi was in South Africa and later when he came to India and all of that, to Dr. Abdul Kalam, to hundreds of people. Now, going back to a very fond memory that I have, this was in the mid-90s. I used to work for Ford Motor Company then. And so we were in office, and suddenly there was a bit of a commotion, a clutter of sorts. And someone said, oh, Anil Kumble has come. And he was a big-time bowler those days. And he actually didn't come for doing a session. He actually came to sell a software that his brother's company was promoting. And at that point of time, he had just been dropped out of the Indian cricket team. And the general talk was, his career is over. He's going to be a software engineer. He's going to sell software the rest of his life, and so on and so forth. After that, about a year later, he actually came back and won and got 10 wickets in a certain innings. And then he talked about how he trained his mind and his body and how he went through some of the challenges that he had in his own mind. And he talked about people that actually helped him do that. And with that, I kind of started telling myself that there is nothing you can't do, and it's all about potential. And I'm so glad the two of you are around here. So I want to keep this fairly conversational. We have 40 minutes for the session, so I'll probably engage the two of them for about 20, 25, and leave 10, 15 minutes at the end for questions that you may have. So let me start with you, Dr. Palan. Dr. Palan, you have a very diverse background, a Malaysian of Indian origin. You have worked in Malaysia, taught in various parts of the world, and you now are a pro-vice chancellor of a fairly large university. The question I want to ask you is, in all of this, how has people potential emerged in a multi-ethnic country like Malaysia, and what are some quick examples that you can give us of multiple ethnicity and working together and getting potential for performance upped?
Sure. Thank you, Raj, for the question. Well, I think Malaysia is a small country, and ASEAN by itself is, even if you include all the neighboring countries, which are more or less multiple races, multiple religions, we are probably about 400 million, and Malaysia by itself is about 35 million. We got three major races, the Chinese, the Indians, and the Malays. But I think one of the key things is, I think it's a very dangerous stereotype if most of the time people have a propensity to align a certain profession to a certain ethnicity. And the last time it happened in Singapore, it became a huge controversy because Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, despite all of his success, ran into this wave of controversy when he said certain people are suited for certain jobs, and therefore we need to kind of manage the development process. I would just step back from that a little bit, but then go back and say one of the key things that has happened is most of these races, they have a propensity to do something much better than something else. And that's what Howard Gardner in his theory of multiple intelligence talked about, the 8 intelligences in a different way. And he said certain communities or certain societies have a propensity to do certain things much better than something else. And I think that's a challenge that we have had mostly in ASEAN as well as in Malaysia. One of the big challenges has been how do we manage a certain profession not be demographically inclined to a certain ethnicity. Because if you found all the precision industries in most of these countries, they are largely Chinese. If you look at the software industry, it's largely Indians. The last time I was with a stand-up comedian from India, he said he is a software engineer by birth because he's a Brahmin. So there is a stereotype, but you would find most of these kind of demographics happening in certain of these races. And most of the Malays, they would probably be in arts. So one of the key things that we have actually tried to focus, I was a director on the Human Resource Development Fund, which is a Ministry of Human Resource initiative, where we try to look at competencies rather than any of these stereotypes, and then look at multiple intelligences and the environment, because Howard Gardner made this point very clear, that it's the environment that shapes people's potential and competencies in certain areas. He made this point about Australians, and he said it's kinesthetic. They are largely more kinesthetic because of the environment. So we went about creating opportunities and an ecosystem for learning irrespective of ethnicities. So even back in the university, I think one of the key things that we tend to do is how do we create this learning ecosystem irrespective of ethnicities and create this right from schools. So the focus is not just going to the tertiary education or to industry, but right from schools. So we make sure that we continue this process of development throughout. So that's been the journey. And a second problem that we've always found is that while human development has taken place, particularly we found that in most of the countries in ASEAN, the inclusivity index has not grown. As development gone, we found that people with vocational education and tertiary education, you find that the Gini coefficient, the inequality index, has actually increased over the last 10 years. So we've been very conscious that while we continue to promote development with a great private sector involvement, with government support, through the tax incentives and through the levy system of charging 1%, 2% of the payroll and funding the appropriate training, we have found that we have to be very conscious of the fact that inclusivity is not effective.
Absolutely.
So two things, sir. One, we are just conscious, and second, we also look at the factor on inclusivity.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Palan. This was almost like a master class on ASEAN and how ethnicities work together. Thank you so very, very much. In fact, many, many years ago, I had heard the story of Ford Motor Company and how, and this is again a story, how Henry Ford would say, these jobs could be done by someone with one hand, these jobs could be done by somebody with one leg, and I don't know if he ever had a job that can be done with someone without a brain. So, but that was typecasting. Mr. Butt, you've had phenomenal success both in the private sector and in PSUs. And as you ran SBI specifically, I heard this quote from a leader from a rival bank that once said that SBI had convincingly reestablished its leadership in every segment of banking in India. That's phenomenal. What I want to ask you, Mr. Bhatt, is can you elaborate on the people strategy that contributed to this super performance?
Thank you. It's kind of difficult to talk about a people strategy which was put in place more than a decade ago. And somehow I also feel that whatever magic happened in State Bank of India during the 5 years that I was there at the helm, the words don't capture that magic quite. What happened, how it happened, why people were enthused, why they were motivated, why they were living, dying, breathing State Bank of India all the time. It's a little difficult to put into words. But just to understand the context, at the time when I took over as the chairman of State Bank of India, the average employee maybe in the entire banking system, public sector banking system, but definitely in the State Bank of India, had a very poor sense of self-worth, right? So we were not taking people from the market, campus recruitment, no IITs and IIMs, no Harvard, no Cambridge. And therefore, there was no culture of excellence or anything. So, very poor self-worth was one. The other was, very poor work culture. A lot of rules, regulations, processes, traditions. So the rule was always more important than the outcome. The rule was always more important than the customer. And therefore, many things happened in a particular way and many more things didn't happen at all. So work culture was like that. And there was a kind of an adversarial relationship with the management and the institutions. The unions were supreme. In fact, some union leaders had a rock star kind of a status, celebrity status, They could do no wrong. They could bang the table of the chairman, they could go and meet the minister and say all kinds of things and get away.
Of even the chairman, is it?
Of even the chairman.
I thought they do that with the HR manager.
Well, HR manager was small fry for them at that point of time. So this was the kind of environment at that point of time. And you must understand that this would have built over time. And in State Bank of India, there were about 250,000 employees. You can imagine an organization which had about 12, 13,000 outlets, branches, 250,000 employees, and which, if it had this kind of culture. So again, all the time saying right now is from hindsight. And so at that time, when I was there, many things I did instinctively or intuitively. Some things I did because I was having those convictions built up in me over a period of time. This is right, this is wrong, this is how it should be, this is how it should be. And some of the things obviously would have been, through due deliberation at that point of time on those issues. But largely it was around building a connect with these people, that they are important, that the organization cares for them, that but for them there would be no State Bank of India. And how to get this message across. So everybody talks about these things, but how do you do it actually in practice? So we did a bunch of things, and I do not know how much time I have, maybe not enough time to talk about it, but so one was to, get the entire top management, with about 25 to 35 people on the same page, for which we spent 5 days together in an offsite in Ambi Valley. We sat there like monks in a cave for 5 days, just talking about what is happening to the bank, thinking about it, reflecting upon it, fighting, arguing, trying to paint the future or whatever it is. It was just to get the top management into the same mindset and the same energy level if you need to do something about it. We ran a bunch of programs for the entire organizations, variously called Parivartan, Citizen SBI, Udaan, and these programs, the same program was attended by everybody in the organization, from chairman to the messenger, 250,000 people. Each program ran from beginning to end. Within 100 days, it covered the entire organization, 2-day program each, right? Huge logistics, huge preparation, huge amount of trainers to be built. I mean, it was massive. And the impact of Parivartan was such that we got requests from other organizations, other banks, from some Government of India departments like railways and things like that, that whether we could do that program for them. But this program was completely SBI-centric. And the programs, it was not about banking. It was about people, it was about culture, it was about values, it was about humanness, it was about goodness. It was just asking you the question who you are. So if you were to ask a State Bank of India officer or an employee at that point of time, who are you? He will say, I am OP Bhatt. No, 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 no. That's your name. Who are you? I am Chairman State Bank of India. No, no, no. That is your role. Who are you? You ask this question 2, 3, 4 times. Nobody knows who they are. I bet in this room nobody knows who they are. If you peel this question one after the other, after the third or the fourth question, you don't have an answer. And that is when people realize that actually you are living in a void, you are living in a vacuum. And which is why, this relationship with things external, things materials, things inconsequential becomes very deep. We ran this program for the entire organization. It was a kind of a quasi-spiritual program. No organization anywhere in the world has ever done it, right? This was one of the programs. And my people would come and tell me that there is no banking in this program. And yet I feel so good about State Bank of India now that I have attended this program. I'll just give you a small story. One day my messenger came to me who had gone through this 2-day program. The guy who used to respond to my bell, get me water or open the door or get a file or whatever it is. He came to me after this program. He was beaming from ear to ear. And he told me in Hindi, so I think I should speak in English here because I do not know. He told me, he says, sir, for the first time in my life, I have understood that by doing good to others, actually you are doing good to yourself.
Yeah, very well said.
This is the wisdom from a messenger. Maybe he's 8th, 10th class or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So I was sort of dumbfounded, I just smiled and looked at him a little blankly. I did not know what to say or how to compliment him or how to respond to that. Then he made a request of me immediately at that point. He said, sir, I have a request from you. I said, what? So he had brought the facilitator for his program, he had brought him with him, and this fellow was waiting somewhere outside. He wanted me to shake his hand. Now, I don't know whether you get it, the chairman of State Bank of India sits on a very high pedestal, It's impossible to get an appointment with him for 6 months, right?
Yep.
So maybe ministers can get it, but even people like Mr. Tata and Mr. Birla have to wait in line to get an appointment, right? And so this fellow thought that the best way he could say thanks or express his gratitude to his teacher who taught him that doing good to others is actually doing good to yourself was to make him meet me. And I said, of course, actually I walked out and brought this guy inside, gave him a cup of tea, this, that. So just to tell you, right? But this was not the only thing. We brought in McKinsey's, we brought in Kellogg's, we brought in Harvard, we brought all of those people. We empowered people, So for example, everybody in the organization, the financial powers are enhanced. The organizational powers are, who can transfer, who can promote, who can do this, that and the other. We reduced computerization, right? But at the center of it all was the people's agenda. I would spend about 35 to 40% of my time on people.
That's great to know.
I met the top 2,500 people in the organization, known as regional managers or assistant general managers, right? I met the top 2,500 people one-to-one in the first 8 months. Every one of them. I met them in groups of 30, 40, 50, and I met them for, guess, how much at a time? How much time did I spend with them? No guesses.
5-10 minutes?
No. I would decide the start time. They would decide the end time. The conversation would be that, look, I'm the new chairman. I'm trying to do good to the organization. But, I could be wrong. I could be making mistakes. You've been in the organization almost as long as I have been, 20, 25, 30 years, right? You also have ideas of what can be done for the organization and what is wrong about this organization, etc. Can you tell me, for the sake of the organization, what are your thoughts so that together we can do something for this organization? First 1 or 2 meetings, people were skeptical. They didn't think that I meant everything that I said. In fact, I would lock the door and throw everybody out. All the other senior people, chief general manager, liaison officer, security officer, secretary, everybody would go out. Just me and these guys, right? After the third or fourth people, the momentum started. People said all kinds of things, including some of them actually shouted at me. Some of them cried and wept because they talked about the time when the bank was unfair to them. He didn't get a promotion or he didn't get a transfer when his wife was having cancer or things like that. And they gave me lots of good advice. So I would say the meeting will end when you want it to end, when you have said everything. Average meeting time was 2.5 hours. So Chairman State Bank spending so much time with middle level officers. The longest meeting was for 10.5 hours.
At a time?
One session.
One session. Fantastic.
Because they didn't let me go. So the message was that they are important. The conversation that we are having is important. And I would take notes, and some of these things would actually get done into the organization. Now, this could be around very many things.
I'll take some follow-up questions from you, Mr.
Okay.
But I think some of these stories were really heart-rendering and touched a chord. Dr. Palan, I want to ask you this. So you were a HR professional at one time, and you're an entrepreneur now. What strategies have you used as an entrepreneur to develop people potential? Because I would guess that as an HR director, that was your bread and butter. But as an entrepreneur, was there any different? Did you have to rethink the way you would look at potential?
Thank you, Raj. I think it's a good question. I think rethink, yes. Frustrated, yes. Because it's when you move into a corporate role or an entrepreneurial role where you basically have report on quarter to quarter back to the shareholders on what the results were. We found that some of the HR initiatives we had put in place were taking too long a time. There was too much of resistance to change, and therefore it was a real challenge. And shareholders were not patient, the board was not patient.
Right.
So coming from a HR background, one of the key things that I always try to be supportive of is to try to keep selling the need for talent development on a continuous basis. And I always remember what you talked about Ford, and I remember what Ford's famous statement was. He said, I asked for a pair of hands, unfortunately a person came attached with it. Yeah, so I think we had to actually put that entire concept, because some of our board came from finance background, so it was very important for us to continue the process of educating them. Since I had a HR background, it was a lot more easier.
Yeah.
To just continue the process, continue to sell. I could understand the frustrations of the HR people. But one of the key things that we always try to do, which I found it very difficult because I came into HR from a psychology background, and therefore to me, I could not quite implement what Jim Collins said in Good to Great. Put the right people on the right seats and get the wrong people off the bus. And to me, letting go people was very difficult because I was largely a social entrepreneur.
Right.
So one of the key things that we said is, okay, why don't we go ahead, just try and find the job person fit.
Right.
Try to create that competency alignment and try to continuously create a culture of learning.
Right.
So that was the biggest emphasis that I think as an entrepreneur I continue to build, continue to focus on building this ecosystem of learning. And today we find that in the university we got two kinds of scenarios. One is most of the academics, because of the background that they come from, mainly the senior professors, they find that it is all right for me to continue to do research or go on long training programs. But the younger professors, who are largely millennials, find that it's about just-in-time, learning bites. So it's about blending and balancing the fine art, getting both these people, because to us, I think the younger academics have to be trained, and they are the pipeline when the senior people retire.
Absolutely.
And so we don't have a retirement age in the university for the professors, because as long as they are tenure, they go on. But we would like an infusion of new ideas and new things, because ultimately what happens is the university has to grow and the students have to grow, and therefore you need this infusion. So
And then
largely,
you
I
need
think
to keep up the performance.
and
all of that.
And I think we heard this morning from Total Brain about the superior and mediocre
Right.
and negative performance. But I think one of the key things that we've always said is if the performance for a continuous periods of time is not happening, then the culture will remove them rather than we have to intervene.
Oh, absolutely. So well said.
So I think they don't get collegial support, they don't get the peer support, and therefore they will have to find ways and goes away.
Absolutely. So
So
very
that's
well
one
said.
of the things that we've done.
Absolutely. So very well said. I mean, the culture takes care of itself. So we are down to the last 5 minutes. So let me ask those that are here if you have questions for either of them, and maybe we could take 2 questions, and if we can keep our responses to about a minute or 2, that'll be great, and then they'll hopefully be available after the session too. So, yes, sir. if you can quickly ask your question
Yeah.
and be specific about who you are asking the question to, that will be helpful.
Yeah, so my question is to Mr. Bhatt, how do you, adapt yourself in the times of digitization and automation, because the customer feedback is not coming, and the employees are also complacent, that bots are working, everything is depositors, basically advances, lending and everything is, done through, this automated mode, So how do you, build up the morale,
Got
and
it.
the incentive, to perform?
Got it. Thank you.
So digitization, what is happening in digitization is that it has brought in, accuracy, speed, it has brought in scale, but it has also brought in about a cultural change. So the culture change is both within the organization and outside the organization with the customers. Within the organization, the hierarchies have changed, the roles have changed, the role definitions and relationships, they have all changed, right? So in a digital environment, when a customer has to go beyond, whatever he does on a computer or on a mobile with regard to his banking transactions, when that is not enough for him and he needs to interact with a bank employee or a bank officer, clearly the nature of his difficulty or the nature of his problem or the nature of his need is of a much higher order than it used to be earlier. Otherwise, the system would have solved it for him. Now, I think the organizations do not really recognize that it is so, that the order of the need, the complexity of the need has changed disproportionately, right? And they are addressing this need in the same old way, same people or the same kind of people with the same knowledge, mindset, background, etc., dealing with it. And therefore, it is leading to huge dissatisfaction because his problem is not getting solved. This fellow is saying that, he's coming with all kinds of things. So that is one issue which is there. The other issue which is there is that because of this computerization or digitization, the customer connect has gone down. So the good thing about this is that customers don't waste time. They have become savvy to do most of their banking needs by themselves. But at the same point of time, sometimes they feel at a loose end. So for example, in State Bank of India, I know many customers, especially the retired people, they would come to the bank simply because it was a place where they felt hope. So even if the transaction is done in 5 minutes, they would hang around for half an hour, 1 hour, whatever it is. Now it may not be a good thing, right thing. Different people can have different views. But what I'm trying to say is that people yearn human connect, even when you're booking airline tickets and all that. So as long as you don't have time and as long as everything is going right, fine. But the moment you run into a difficulty or there is you want to talk to somebody and there's nobody. There's nobody there. So as organizations introduce digitization, they are not wary of the fact that somewhere a different kind of customer connect or availability to the customers of some human beings should also be part of that organizational revamp, even as you digitize, right? And it doesn't have to be Siri. It has to be actually a human being. So these are the two things which are happening. And to my mind, simplistically, there is a solution for both these issues, just that it is not being addressed because A, we don't realize it. B, we have become too cost conscious. Taking out cost actually means taking out people, throwing them out on the streets. This is what is happening. So therefore, this issue is not being addressed upfront, as much and as quickly as it should be. I don't know whether I've answered your question.
That's a great response. I wish we had no time limit to the session. There's another question coming up from there, Atul.
Initiative on Parivartan when you were there. So the question is, has it continues? And if it doesn't, then the question to you is, why do such initiatives or interventions get dropped if the chairman changes or the CEO changes? So what happens? Because you did get benefit out of it.
You're putting me in hot water. So actually, this is a problem. Sustainability and continuity is a problem which is there across all organizations, all boards, all succession. Everywhere this is a very big problem. So how do you build continuity into an organization's processes, into an organization's culture, into an organization dynamism? That is a very big problem. Coming to the specific State Bank of India, actually the good thing is that many of the cultural aspects of the programs that we put in, so one was Parivartan, the other was Citizen SBI, where we told the employees that you are no longer employees of the bank, you are a citizen of State Bank of India. So what does this mean to you? How does it shift your understanding of yourself, your relationship with the organization, with the customer? What happens to you? We just force them to think differently, just shake them in their brains, right? So therefore, what happened was that a lot of the impact, emotional, psychological, behavioral, to some extent spiritual impact, like my messenger, it has actually remained till today with the employees. And many times when I meet some of them in airports or something like that, they are actually very overwhelmed. You can see from their language, tone, etc., when they remember and the fact that they still do it. So in that sense, because of the kind of programs these were, some of it has remained. At another sense, some of these programs have been done by State Bank of India since then. So how different they are in terms of being better or worse, I would not like to comment on that. But actually, the bank has tried to continue with some of these programs. But, there is, something known as a program, and there is something known as the heart or spirit of the program. So how do you get into that? It's a different story. I don't want to go into that. But thank you for your question. It was a great question.
That's a great question and equally great response. Unfortunately, we seem to be out of time. Maybe I can take one last question. Oh, she's there. Can you? All right, so one of the two.
Okay. Okay,
I
so
know.
this is a question to Dr. Palan. So in your experiences, is there any difference in the talent landscape between India and Malaysia?
I think just simply because of the availability of talent that you have in India, I believe that you have a greater choice. But I think in Malaysia, particularly Malaysia, because we are a smaller population, and there's a huge dearth of skilled talent. So I think there's been this great focus on now, I think they talk about shared prosperity 2030, by which time we would like to have a 35% skilled workforce. So because we don't have a skilled workforce, the first priority is we have to go and hire people from the neighboring countries in ASEAN, or from countries like India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, or even from the Middle East. So that's what puts tremendous pressure. And we have a lot of brain drain because of the various other issues. People migrate in search of other pastures. So we have to go and get them back, talent retention programs. So I think that's the big difference in the talent landscape between India and Malaysia, I think. Sheer numbers and skilled people. Thank you.
I should admit that, this is, I had the closest view to probably, between the two of you, easily 80 years of experience, and I could have not traded this to anything else. Unfortunately, ma'am, we are running out of time. Before they... One word answer? Okay, you can try.
Yeah. I just wanted to know, since from all three stalwarts, what is that one mantra that has worked? All of you have been in HR. What is it that has worked in past, and what is it that would work in future for us, who are the budding HR professionals and who want to drive this further? One mantra.
One word answer. So maybe the two of you can go. And I would say don't give up. It's easy to give up. Don't give up.
You or me? So I would say there has to be a continuous attempt at sense making. Things are different all the time. Every second, every millisecond it is different. So how do you make sense of senses around you? How do you connect to it? And how do you use that to inspire your wisdom, right? So therefore your answers, your feelings, everything will be different every time. But therefore you'll also be right and connected. But how to make that happen?
I can't give you a one-word answer, but I'll give you a six-word answer, I think. Be passionate, get a seat on the table. Be passionate and get a seat on the table. Most of the time, I think HR just gives up, and therefore they don't get a seat on the table.
Yeah.
So be passionate and get a seat on the table.
No, thank you. So no, before the next questioner comes and says, sorry, I have a one-word answer question for you, I want to really, really thank both of you here. I enjoyed being here, learning from both of you, and it was fantastic moderating the session. Thank you so very much, Mr. Bhatt and Dr. Palan.
And thank you, Raj. Thank you and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.